You're listening to the Reflective Teacher Podcast, and this is episode number 7. I'm Selena Woodward, and I'm an English and drama teacher, university lecturer, and with edufolios.org, a big-time reflective practitioner. So how can reflective practice help you grow your teaching skills, fall in love with your profession all over again, and help you nail accreditation and teacher registration with less stress and less work? Well, this is the Reflective Teacher Podcast. Hi, thank you for joining me again. This week we're talking professional development or professional learning, and it's inspired, this podcast, by a request I received from Hilary Trotter, who is an assistant principal at Narracourt High School. Thanks, Hilary, for the inspiration. I hope genuinely that I can answer your question and maybe a little bit more. Hilary's question is about how to reflect and write about training and development that she undertakes, which is an awesome question. And so this podcast is all about the secrets of documenting that professional development or learning, so that 1 hour or 6 hours or 15 minutes listening to this podcast has the potential to become as many hours as you can make it. I guess the first thing I'd want you to think about is getting you to consider where you record or how you record your professional development requirements anyway. Of course, we all are under the requirement for registration. We have to complete a certain number of hours of professional learning every year. In most states and territories, that's 20 hours a year, and you add that up over the period of your registration. So there in New South Wales, it would be 5 years, 100 hours. Here in South Australia, it would be 60 over 3. Tasmania, you are super lucky because you don't have any requirements for any particular numbers of hours, which is awesome. So you can go crazy if you want to. We all can. But what's really important is often we think that all we need to do is do the PD to get the hours. And obviously that's not really the point of the professional development, is it? And in previous podcasts, we've talked about finding things to talk about in our portfolio. And sometimes we forget that there really ought to be a connection between the professional learning we're doing and the reflecting and growth that we're showing in our portfolio for accreditation. Really, Edufolios came about. I made it for myself when I realized that connection existed. I used to write a blog on teachertechnologies.com. And as I was writing about what I was doing with technology in my classroom, I realized I was making a heap of connections to focus areas and standards. Of course I was talking about my practice. And then when I was asked by the TRB here in South Australia to document that PD, and I had to painstakingly enter it into a completely different system that wouldn't let me upload evidence to support it, etc., I got quite frustrated about what seemed to me to be doing the same thing twice in 2 different locations. You may already know this story, and that's why Edufolios came about. It was a piece of technology that would let me reflect on what I was doing whilst gathering my PD hours. And the first iteration of Edufolios, its sole purpose was to send that data to the different parties for me, to get the technology to do that work, to reduce my workload. Obviously, it does a lot more than that now. But this is where I think my expertise and my experience of connecting the dots will be really valuable to you, because I felt this pain a fair few years ago and I've been trying to solve that problem. You see, every single state and territory has learning journals or reflecting on teaching practice or inquiry into professional practice or professional reading listed in its things you can do for professional hours. Although we know that we love face-to-face professional development, and that can never be underestimated, actually writing about what you're doing in your classroom counts as professional development. That's right. If you are reflecting regularly because you're gathering evidence of your progress, that reflection counts as professional learning in pretty much every state and territory across Australia. And if you head to edufolios.org/007 today, I'm going to give you something that will share the links to each one of those states and territories so you can check that I'm telling you the truth. But I want you to remember that, because when you're gathering your hours of PD, whether that be face-to-face, reading books, even listening to this podcast or other awesome education podcasts, or even taking part in an online tweet-up, I've put that in as PD before. That all counts as professional learning. Each registration board or accreditation agency is recognizing that professional learning happens in far more places than just face-to-face. So Hillary's question wasn't about that, but I wanted to state that because sometimes we don't connect those dots. And it's really important to know that writing in your portfolio counts as professional learning, and you should record that. So going back to Hillary's question, she said, I struggle with what to write after I have attended a conference or I've done some training and development. I also struggle with what to write after I've been reading. Okay, I'm going to quote the Northern Territory's TRB here. They like to call professional development professional learning, and their reason for that is because it is not just the knowledge gained in a professional development session that makes the most difference to professional practice, but how that knowledge is then applied. And that is beautiful. That goes with my values perfectly. I really feel that everything that I do with my time has to be to inform my practice to make a greater impact on my students, my colleagues, or my site, which is very much in line with what the career stages in the standards say. So if I'm going to a professional development, Hillary, as I am there, I am constantly connecting what I'm hearing with my practice. Sometimes I'm disagreeing with what they're saying, and then I'm evaluating why that is. There's usually a really powerful learning opportunity from those moments. Sometimes I'm inspired and I'm having increasing aha moments constantly. What I'm documenting during that professional practice is not what they're telling me. It's what I am getting out of it, what I am learning. And that's what I want to talk about today, because what am I getting out of it? What am I learning? Is where we can create a catalyst for several posts in sequence, which grow through the career stages as far as you want them. So the first thing you need to think about is how you're recording it and how ready you are for an audit. If all we're doing is writing about what we did and what standards we think that might have covered, then we're really limiting our opportunities for growth. And we're also really limiting our opportunity for impact because maybe we are going away and practicing it, but we're not documenting it and we're not looking at what the impact is as a result and growing and changing and creating beautiful stories of practice. I also want you to think about your audit. If you are just filling in boxes and storing certificates and things like that in a box, it's going to be a great deal of stress when it comes to the audit in some states and territories. I know here in South Australia, whenever I run professional development, there's always a panic for the certificate. But the reality is the certificate is not a record of your learning. It's a record of your attendance. And the TRB would be much happier or would be quite happy to receive an evidence post or a photograph or something like that to show you were there and what you learned. Because as the NT say, it's not the session that makes the difference. It's what you do with what you learned in it. And I want you to remember that, Hillary, as we go through today. Okay. The other thing I want to bring into this conversation is those spheres of influence. I think I've mentioned them in every single podcast. If this is the first time you're listening to the Reflective Teacher podcast, then make sure you go back and listen to episode number 3, where we talked about the focus areas and the spheres of influence. As you're at PD, you are usually learning something completely new and you haven't yet had the opportunity to apply it in your practice. That usually means that professional learning sits in the graduate focus areas. Unless the professional learning during the day, they give you the opportunity to apply what they're teaching you into an imagined context, or you've brought something with you and you're building on it with this new learning, it's highly likely that it is just new learning. And so unless you then go and apply that in your classroom or share that with colleagues or implement that at your site, your evidence in your portfolio will remain at that graduate level. Now, if you're busy building a portfolio for proficiency, highly accomplished, or lead, then you're going to want to give yourself the opportunity to take that new learning and apply it in different contexts. That's how we go through the spheres of influence. So to recap on those, At the graduate level, your sphere of influence is just yourself and a little bit of the students you meet on prac, but majoritively the focus areas ask you to talk about what you know and what you understand. When we get to proficient, the focus shifts very strongly to your students and how you're applying what you know and understand to create an impact on the students in your classroom. When we get to highly accomplished, it expands again. You're still measuring your impact on your students, of course, but now you're adding in your impact on your colleagues and how you're influencing them through mentoring and other professional programs. For lead, those of you doing lead, of course, you know that expands to the impact you're having on your colleagues and your students at your site, the whole site, through projects that you're running usually. So when you go to this PD, and I know there in New South Wales, your PD is accredited at these career stages, which will help you. That is not the case in all states and territories, which is why I'm labouring this a little bit. You need to be careful that what you write, Hillary, is heading at least to proficient, and that you're reflecting on what you have learned in line with what you'd like to do with it. If you can connect it with something you've already done in the past or a plan that you have for the future, then the evidence that you're writing will be richer and will hit more focus areas too. So let's talk about the focus areas. Now, episode 2 and 3 are perfect for that if you need to know specifics about how to use them. What I'd like to talk about is sometimes we ask for the certificate because we want to see what standards they've written at the bottom. It's really important that you understand that to get beyond graduate, you need to put this learning into your context. So my other tip would be, don't limit yourself to what they say on the certificate, because when you're connecting what you're learning to your practice, you will connect it to different focus areas and different standards. And that is how you are showing that you're applying it to your context. So although they can be a guide, they are not the end of the story. They should only be the beginning. And in some states and territories, they ask PD providers to tell you what standards. In others, they prefer us not to. So it depends on your context in your state. But, if they give you a list, don't just limit yourself to that, because that means you are limiting yourself to it at the graduate standard usually. Okay, so let me give you some examples, because I know that Hillary was asking me for examples, and as usual, I'm going to do with the sacrificial lamb. So at the bottom of the notes for this podcast, which you can find at edufolios.org/007, I'm going to share with you some of my reflections on professional learning, and I'm going to talk you through them now and share with you what I did and how this works. Now, what you're going to see when you click on those links are the final versions that I have typed up, checked, usually had standard checked by a friend or mentor or colleague using the collaborate feature in edufolios, and then published. Okay. I want you to know that when I'm at a professional learning event, I, in edufolios, open a new post and I whack all of my notes and my thoughts in there, but I don't publish it. I save it as a draft. And in fact, if I do it by opening edufolios on my phone or my Surface, where I've got a camera built in, when I go to add media, I have the option to add a photograph that I'm taking right now, which speeds things up. It means that I can just hold up my Surface or my phone and that picture will be inserted straight away into my post. So if I was to show you a draft, it will just be random notes. There'll be no worries about punctuation, spelling. It's a creative process. I'm just whacking my thoughts and my questions down. There'll be random pictures just thrown in there. And then I'll hit save draft. And then when I've made time to do my reflection using my planner, and remember in the episode before last, which would have been episode 005, I provided you with a way of planning when you're going to do these reflections and how you're going to, know exactly what you're going to do, what you're going to write about in each one of those sessions. So that's edufolios.org/005. When I've got my planned time to do it, I will sit and I will change, the notes into paragraphs, and I will give myself the opportunity to connect with what I've been thinking since and to develop that. So one of the posts I'm going to share with you is called Adolescent Mental Health, Supporting Young People Through Anxiety, Stress and Tough Times. Now, this was a professional learning event that I went to in March last year, so a year ago. And when you look at it, you'll see that although I've been teaching for 21 years, I majoritively have graduate evidence there. And I have managed to tag I've managed to tag 3 proficient focus areas. So why is that? Well, because this wonderful PD was run by Little Lessons here in South Australia. I went there to help Leanne out, and I got the opportunity to learn from this awesome professional development provider. Go and read the post and find out when the next PD event is. It was really good. But I teach now at Flinders University. And as much as mental health is a big issue there too, in terms of we still have anxiety and stress and tough times to work with, and this was really helpful, I haven't yet had an opportunity to apply any of this in my current role as a lecturer at the university. Had I done so, there would have been another post after this talking about how I've used some of these strategies, at which point I would have been firmly in the proficient stage. But because in this post, this reflects some new learning and some new resources and understanding, and a little bit, I think what I did in this post was connected to prior learning. So I've got some evidence of proficient because I was able to relate that to things I've already done in my classroom. What you'll find when you read that is I'm not writing about what she told me. I'm writing about what I learnt from what she told me and how I would apply that. And that, Hilary, would be my biggest tip for you. Focus on what you're taking away, not what is actually being done. I often look in portfolios and I see, attended this PD, we talked about blah, full stop. That is fine for the purposes of your audit for your registration requirements, but it is a wasted opportunity when it comes to accreditation, because you may well have hit something at the very early career stages, and then you could write another post subsequently saying, and here I am applying that in my classroom. Here's the lesson plan. Here's how that was informed by this training. Now here's another post. This was the result. And now we could be getting up to HA. Here's me delivering this PD to some other teachers and helping them to bring this into their classroom. And you see how that one professional development, in this case, this was a 2-hour PD, could become 20 hours if I keep developing and focusing on what the Northern Territory said about focusing on what I take away from this and building on it. That is how you make one PD session become 20 hours of PD. All right, you keep writing and reflecting about what you're doing about it. But in that first instance, say you've listened to one of the podcasts, it was a 15-minute podcast usually. You write about what you took away from that and hopefully what you're planning to apply from it. Then you go and do what it was that you were going to do, you said, and you keep coming back and saying, this is the impact, and this is the impact on me or on my students or on my colleagues. And that would be my major advice. Don't be limited by the portals and recording tools that you're given by the registration boards, because they're not thinking about this with those two hats. They're not thinking about this for accreditation and for PD. They're just thinking about it for their one requirement. And we can be smarter than that. So if you do have an Edufolio, you will know that as you write your posts, you have a space at the bottom where you can record your PD hours. And in most states and territories, the export routine that we have in your analytics dashboard will replace the process of having to manually enter it into a system for your TLB. You can just send it to them instead. You will have no scrambling for evidence or data if you're audited, because you will have everything that you need and you can relax. And most importantly, you will take that professional development and you will use it to create several posts in the future where you demonstrate what you learned, how you're going to apply it, what happened when you applied it, and what the impact was. You can take that graduate new learning through as many career stages as you like. Hilary, I hope that gives you some ideas about how to go about writing about what you've read, what you've done at face-to-face PD, what you've listened to in a podcast. Really keen to hear what you think. Make sure you come back and comment on edufolios.org/007. And if any of you have a question that you would like me to answer in one of these podcasts, Hilary tweeted to me. You can do that by going to Twitter at Edufolios. You can message me on Instagram, which is Edufolios, or come over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/, you've guessed it, Edufolios. Next week, we're going to be having a bit of a different podcast episode. We're actually going to be talking to Professor Eddie Blass, and her project, the Inventorium. I promise you, you do not want to miss this episode. That interview sent tingles down my spine. Some of the facts that we are dealing with regarding children or students leaving school with no qualifications, and the work that Eddie is doing around Standard 1 and how students learn and who they are and their development is staggering. Her tips around that and her work in that is important. Really is. So I want to make sure that you tune in next week for episode 8. It will be totally worth it. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you on Facebook on Thursday. You can always come to facebook.com/edufolios, find the podcast playlist, and you will see me there answering any of the questions that you have. So Hilary or anyone else, after you've listened to this, if you have questions around this professional development thing, please make sure you fire them to me, and I will make sure that I answer them for you in that life. Anyway, take care, have a great week, and I'll see you next week on the Reflective Teacher Podcast.